Welcome back to Simon and White, the podcast at the center of media, business, and politics. I'm Christian White, and joined as always by Mark Simon. Mark, please say hello.
Hi, everybody. Hello from Taipei.
Well, Mark, yes, you're in Taipei. We've had an election here, midterm elections in the United States. It's inconclusive at this point. The count continues. It looks like Republicans will narrowly pick up the House. The Senate, at best for Republicans, will be decided December 6th in a runoff in Georgia, but the big red wave did not materialize. What are people thinking and saying in Taiwan and the rest of Asia about this outcome?
First of all, I think the overall impression in Taiwan among the foreign policy friends of mine, and I've talked to two guys, both of whom are DPP, but they're all, one of them is in office and very senior. The other one's retired. They both look at this as a good thing. They were actually quite worried about the sentiment on the right of the right getting too strong and like a Marjorie Taylor Greene and some of this quote unquote latent Trumpism. In other words, Trump was never really trusted by the Taiwanese and also in some other places in Asia. I think remember my experiences with the Trump administration in Hong Kong. The administration was fabulous. I mean, Mike Pence was wonderful, Pottinger, Kellogg, everybody, Tom Rose. These were great guys. State Department was fantastic. But we used to bite our hands and cringe if the whole idea of Trump actually saying something, because he really doesn't care about human rights. He really thought he could get trade deals and money, all that going back and forth. So there's always been distrust of him. Essentially, I think they're happy with what's happening. The Biden administration has been sufficiently hawkish with China. There's strong bipartisan support. They're very comfortable with McCarthy if he wins. They're happier if Pelosi wins, probably. I would be very blunt about that. We have to remember Taiwan is a left-leaning country. In other words, it is one of the things here that's always drives the left in Taiwan crazy. They have better relationship with the anti-communist Republicans than they do with the other ones. Ben Rhodes was just here, the former Obama guy. And of course, I wonder what kind of business he was doing here. I'm sure we're going to see like the Obama Foundation here in like a year doing something big, where we're like, unlike the Clinton people who would come in and say what they wanted you to say, Obama will probably come in and tell Taiwan to surrender. But Ben Rhodes came here and, he was like, oh my God, Taiwan, it's this great place and loves the culture, but really wouldn't say anything in this long Atlantic piece that he wrote that's out there that really helps Taiwan. So they're overall happy. I talked to one Japanese reporter friend who does the foreign policy stuff because he called me for information about the U.S. thing. The Japanese are probably fine with it as well. The overriding thing is, and I know this just is the fun thing is, they really get the fact that Trump was a drag on the ticket. They really get it. They just don't understand. Most of the political people here, left or right, are pretty serious people, and so a guy like Trump they get it. They see his appeal and stuff like that. Taipei's got Mayor Ku. You know what I'm saying? There's different dynamic politicians in Asia, but I think they're pretty good at U.S. politics. They're not that bad, and they're like, whoa, what happened? Now I will say this: in Hong Kong, I think they don't really care, and in China they don't really care. But I think my takeaway from China is I think the Chinese are doing an assessment of the American people, and I think it came out negatively. I think it actually raised my concern a little bit. I think they see the American people as not all that serious in demanding candidates or having a direction. In other words, a lot of times if you look at people and you look at some of these candidates out there, I think it basically, if you're in the CCP, once again, you're like, hey, you know what? These guys, they're just not serious people.
Right.
Candidates, and this is how they vote.
To jump in here quickly. So Yeah, so sort of as a right winger, I wish Asians were more upset in the sense I wish they thought, gee, Republicans would expand the Navy and expand the Air Force and increase our force posture in the Pacific in order to deter war, that we would encourage the Japanese to go to 2% of GDP, that we'd come up with some coherent strategy, a foreign policy based around like a Reaganist view of human rights that is a form of political warfare against our adversaries, not just a woke crusade around the world of flying rainbow flags off of embassies, but caring about dissidents like Jimmy Lai, like others who are fighting our primary enemy, sort of the whole spectrum of a foreign policy. But we don't have that. And actually, this is one of my many gripes about Ukraine. I understand the desire to help Ukraine and to make life harder on Russia if it's going to invade countries, but it means that essentially congressional Republicans have the same foreign policy as Joe Biden. I mean, do you sense that as a problem there, that Asians are sort of like, we don't see a whole lot of difference, a whole lot of change, regardless of who's running which committees in Congress?
I think in one sense that's okay, because I think the Democrats have come around on China a lot, except for the left. And unfortunately, they're right. I mean, we got the Marjorie Taylor Greene and the nut job, plants there. So in that sense, but no, I think overall I'd have to agree with the point that basically they're looking around, they don't see much difference. I mean, let me ask you, all right, if say you have 224 Republicans, 220 Republicans or something like that, which is not a big league. From a foreign policy point of view, what does the House do? I mean, the only thing I think they do is build more submarines and build more stuff, because then you can go like up to the Newport News Mafia and you got 25 votes there for new submarines. You know what I'm saying? So all of a sudden submarines pass with 260. You get the 8 or 10 Democratic votes in the Northeast for new submarines. And so Biden is forced to buy new submarines, probably buy some new helicopters from Skorsky, out in California we'll get a few things. So I see defense spending going up. I mean, do you see that?
I don't know. I guess, yes, in the sense that Congress when you have divided Congress, spending tends to go up in general, because it's not that, people sort of X out or veto other people's spending. Actually, everyone gets everything. That's the way they get to yes on the budget. Yes for more, with Obama, it was that way. It was, we're going to cut $2 of defense for every dollar of domestic spending. There weren't any cuts at all, except really to defense. I would take it if they'd spend more on submarines. I think that is an area we still have an advantage. Let me do a quick digression, though. So the Chinese, if they invade Taiwan, if they attack Taiwan, aren't going to make it easy for us. Politically, they'd make it easy for us if they attacked our bases on Okinawa at first. That would bring the U.S. and Japan in, without a doubt. And it would be something we could understand, something we could perhaps thwart. Let's say instead that they round up their fishing fleet. So instead of a troop carrier or an amphibious assault ship with 500 or 5,000 Chinese troops coming across the Taiwan Strait, instead you have, hundreds, maybe even 1,000 large fishing vessels. And then even if we do have submarines out there, so you're driving around, you're the captain, driving a $3 billion brand new submarine. And if you see a troop ship or a Chinese destroyer, a Chinese aircraft carrier, are you going to use one of your, $500,000 torpedoes or $1 million missiles against this thing? Sure. But are you going to use that against the fishing vessel if there are hundreds of them? And also, you're going to give away your position when you fire that first shot. I'm not an expert on this. You have more of a naval background, but am I thinking in the terms of?
I think, first of all, the Chinese fishing fleets, the U.S. Coast Guard just had an interaction with them down off Ecuador, and the Chinese fishing fleets were very aggressive. I think we have to come up with an operational way how to handle them. My understanding is the probable way is basically we're going to get small frigates, or we're going to get patrol boats or something like that. And on the top of each of them, we're going to put like 250 calibers and 20 millimeters, and we're just going to shoot the engines out. In other words, and then if you're doing that, then the Chinese would have to escalate. In other words, if the fishing vessels are causing that problem, the Chinese would have to escalate. I think they're going to need to start considering how we deal with them, because I think that's a very good point. Greg Turode over at Reuters has always been very good on this stuff. Every once in a while, some think tank in D.C. goes, the Chinese merchant fishing fleet. And a guy comes up and I'm going like, yeah, we've known about this for years. Ask the Filipinos. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
I actually went off. Jolo and the area down there years and years ago when I was in shipping, and this was in the late '90s. And the Chinese fishing fleet was a problem, and they were fishing. That was I mean, that was even they weren't just getting paid to sit there. It's a very complicated situation. Would they come off the upper West Coast? Those are very rough waters. You know what I'm saying? That's the type of place that people run from, probably every other week. You have to get out of there because of a storm coming through. That's where you're talking. You're talking basically, west of the islands, west of Okinawa. I'm sorry, east of Okinawa. That gets very rough water very, very fast. And I know that from shipping. I mean, that's the regular place of 8-foot, 9-foot waves, 7-foot waves. So can they bob around out there much longer? I'm not sure. But your point is, if they're ever going to do a boycott and a blockade of Taiwan, they're going to use the fishing vessels, and they'll use the fishing vessels hoping the Taiwanese do something so they can come to the aid of their fishing fleet that is basically able to stand there. Now, will they be able to come to the aid of them on the west coast of the island? I'm not sure. I also, I've been invited to the after drinks party of the war party, the war games. You know what I'm saying? The after party. And so I've been to 4 or 5 of those. Just, where they have people in town and they're looking for folks who enjoy the dinner. In fact, I went to one with Jack Keane and Paul Wolfowitz one time. And, it was interesting. Almost everyone I've been to, they don't believe the Chinese will leave Okinawa and now those southern Japanese islands alone. They don't, because if you're a naval commander, if you're somebody, are you really going to leave some F-15 squadrons down there, some Marine Harrier squadrons and attack helicopters? People forget those attack helicopters can come out 250, 300 miles, loiter for 30, 40 minutes, and then come back. So, you could be dealing with Apaches with, anti-ship missiles, 300, and they're just cruising along, 100 feet above the water. Very, very hard to shoot down from anything over the horizon, So I don't know. I mean, I think it's really difficult to say what's going to happen, but I will say this, since I'll move the subject. I think that when we look at what's happened recently in Taiwan, this is my favorite new thing. This guy gets his little thing. I did that because I'm telling you, this guy has got the whole region up in arms. I just think he moved too early. Everybody's aware now, Now the Taiwanese aren't worth a shit, to be honest with you, when it comes to preparing for this stuff. It's one of the things I think the Americans, we really are not critical enough of them. Everybody shows up over here. Everybody says the nice things to the Taiwanese. But for those of us who are on the ground, for those of us who have visited military bases, for those of us who smoke cigars with guys with 2 stars on their shoulders, who are good guys, who are good people, they'll tell you they don't have what they need. They don't have enough, seriously. I challenge anybody that they don't have enough anti-air and anti-ship missiles to last more, and I'm giving them credit, than 3 weeks. Okay? And that's considering the Chinese take out 30, 40%. If the Chinese take out none, they last for 4 weeks. All right? They don't have enough small arms to equip their troops. They literally had a poster of a guy standing on a beach with a pistol to defend Taiwan. Who comes up with that stuff? You know what I'm saying? I mean, my point is like, so I think, and we just saw, Xi Jinping, he's basically making it very clear, I'm coming over there sooner or later.
And do you believe that? Yeah, I mean, because this all sounds very alarming. It sounds like going back to 1939 when U.S. troops in a very small army, when conscription started in 1940, they were using like broomsticks and they were, firing at an old Model T that had tank written on the side of it as practice, just wholly unequipped. So scary. But yeah, what do you think politically about, so everyone, it's weird. There's been the shift from, oh no one's going to invade Taiwan, to Taiwan will be invaded by 2027. Do you take Xi at his word that he wants to, quote unquote, resolve this at some point?
I came to this conclusion 20 years ago. When a dictator tells you what he's going to do, he's going to do. And I came to it through a very different means than other people. I came through it with really almost a street-like credibility. And I came to it in not Hong Kong, but in Taiwan, where we were having some, maybe not say 20, but 17 years ago, we were having some serious issues with triads when we opened up, maybe 20 years ago, when we opened up, Apple opened up Next Magazine, and the triad guys kept threatening us, you guys keep doing something and we're going to come up and take care of you. And of course, we wrote another couple of articles and they came up. Now, I must say, it looked like something out of Analyze This with all the fat guys running around. They showed up wearing their triad T-shirts, and they were all like these 50-year-old men, you know what I'm saying? You're like, and they made the mistake of walking into the Next Magazine, Apple Daily, into the print design center where the printing guys were like learning how to print stuff, and the sales team. So like, you came into like if you went to the journalist office, they would have all ran away screaming with their hair on fire, taking notes for their memoir on how scared they were. You know what I'm saying? And but our guys picked up the softball bats and the baseball bats and went at it with them. I still just remember seeing these old guys in black shirts with like gold lettering. They were running down the street and they could barely make it. And the cops just pulled up to them on the motor scooters, like, it just got them. But my point is this. My point is like, bad guys, when they say they're going to do something, they got to do it. That's the nature of these guys. You know what I'm saying? It's the reason why when you remember your kid and your dad and mom goes, you got to call a bully on it. A bully will never say, no, a bully's going to pretty much punch you. You know what I'm saying? People, if you stand up to a bully, they'll back down. No, that's not the way it works. The reason why he's a bully is he probably likes to fight. He's probably had some reasonable success in the past. You know what I'm saying? However, when you do stand up to him and you show him the price, you may take a bit of a beating, but he won't come back as long as you can inflict some pain. You know what I'm saying? In other words, it's not worth it for him. I mean, it's what I call the Captain America lesson from the movie, actually, where they, if you have to keep beating the guy up, you know what I'm saying? He's like, all right, I'm tired of this after a while, or you pay a price. I think Xi Jinping has backed himself into a corner. He's going to have to do something, or he's going to have to get some type of concession out of China. And that's if I were the Taiwanese, I'd worry about the Biden administration there. I think, I saw that guy, Ben Rhodes, over there, and you read that Atlantic piece, you know what I'm saying? And it's almost like saying, well, you can keep your traditional dance and you can have hot pot and your Taiwan noodles will be just as good. You know what I'm saying? All you got to do is, this. It's almost like, I almost expect him sometimes to break out into like a song and dance thing. Like, all you got to do is this, it's like, seriously, it's really bad. And the Taiwanese, unfortunately, I'm not so sure. I think Chai I give her credit. I think she's tougher than we always thought she was, but she's going to be backed into a corner pretty soon. It's no different than, green shirt Zelensky over in Ukraine. The one thing the Republican Congress is going to be very good for, not doing Russia's bidding, but the fact of the matter is that we're spending way too much money there. And we need to get these weapons out where it's really in the U.S. strategic interest. I think it's important that you and I differ a little bit on this. I think it's really important that we basically keep Putin at bay. I do not think it's important that we retake all the ground. I think it's basically important that Ukraine survives. I would rather be putting in $10 billion a year in economic aid in the future, you know what I'm saying? I'm fine with that. Than basically $3 or $4 billion. What are we giving now? How many billion are we up to now in Ukraine?
That's a great question. And there's the issue of how much has been promised versus actually delivered. So, I mean, I want to say we're at like 60 billion. But whether
my understanding is this, I thought it was delivered something like 20 billion in aid and stuff like that. But I'd rather give because once the Ukrainians stop blowing up stuff, and they get their military, and we keep them modern and things like that, and they can importantly, they can rebuild their Air Force, and they know what they need now to work. They'll have a much better buying program for us. And I think the Ukrainians have done the Taiwanese a huge favor in the sense of showing the Taiwanese, let's get away from this stupid, I never liked it, this thing, we'll keep the Chinese from ever landing. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, we'll keep them from that. But the real deterrent is if Xi Jinping has to fight his way ashore, and then he's fighting in the hills and the mountains and everything else for the next 4 months.
This was settled so clearly with first the Maginot Line in World War II and then with the Atlantic Wall. I mean, if you put enough force in one area, you're going to get through. You're going to get people ashore. Now, you don't want to be in the first or second or third wave, but sooner or later, you're going to get a beachhead if you put enough force there. So, taking advantage of Taiwan.
So you want to make it. You want to make it ungovernable. There's actually, I can't remember, there's a great book on how France was never really conquered. And it's the reason why the French are much better than, some of the other countries in terms of fighting. That you did have the Vichy France, but you did have Free France. And the Germans did not move around France freely all the time. You know what I'm saying? In other words, I was reading in the piece one time, German patrols, you see in the movies of two guys walking down the street and Pierre and Jean Blondin come up and stab him in the hearts. That didn't happen because they moved down the streets in groups of 30 and 40 because somebody would take a shot at them. You know what I'm saying? And, they'd have a difficult time. And, in other words, the population never subsided and that became very difficult. Now, of course, the Germans did, roll around the place in tanks, just like the Chinese do in Jing'an. But the point is that you've got to be able to fight. And I think that's incredibly important for Taiwan. And I think one of the problems we have now is, and I've been raising hell about it over here. In fact, that's one of the reasons I saw some of these guys. They came to see me because they're not getting weapons here. Taiwan's not getting the weapons they need. And the Taiwanese are not doing anything about it. They could easily get licensing demand. They make semiconductor chips. They could make frickin' Stinger missiles and javelins. You know what I'm saying? They could easily do that. Where are the rifles? They don't have enough rifles. They don't have a civil defense. And that's where the U.S. has to step up. And the problem is over at AIT and some of these other places, literally it's like watching. Remember the movie Charlie Wilson's War, the movie? Everybody remember that with Tom Hanks?
Sure, yeah. Good movie, good book, yep.
Yeah, the scene where Tom Hanks is in Pakistan and he's talking to that guy they call the Tool, the CIA guy. And the CIA guy is like, we don't want to have a major escalation here. That's still the mentality over at AIT. That's still the mentality in the State Department.
No doubt whatsoever. No.
They do not want weapons coming in here.
Oh, it feels very safe when you're in a Crusader castle on the outskirts of town, surrounded by diplomatic security and bulletproof glass and windows, and you have a ticket out of the country if the Chinese do invade. Yeah, these people are.
It's a huge problem, and people need to start. The Taiwanese and the Americans, and that's the one thing a Republican Congress can do is, we need to get people like Mike Gallagher. We need to get other people, and they need to come over here. And that's the problem with the damn Taiwanese again, is everybody comes over here and they put them in a freaking bubble wearing a mask around all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times the Taiwanese, if there was if the Chinese came over, did 6 months, took Taiwan, I think a lot of people would look at it. In other words, I think in many ways, sorry to move forward like that. I think in many ways, sometimes I look at China, I think of the U.S. ambassador to Kuwait.
Yes.
Just the wrong message all the time.
Right. So for background, this was the woman, I believe, who said that Saddam was not going to invade. Was she the ambassador to Iraq or Kuwait? I forget. But basically said, don't worry, be happy.
Yeah.
The opposite.
And he came.
To give more just background for viewers and listeners on AIT, so that's the American Institute in Taipei. That's the de facto U.S. embassy there. And there's another wrinkle with this, Mark, which is that they make the Taiwanese in Washington ask permission before they ask permission to buy arms. So if Taiwan, whether you want to buy a single bullet or an M1 tank or, you name the weapon system, you need permission from the State Department. It's an interagency process. The Taiwan Relations Act creates a process, says we're going to sell you the weapons you need for your defense. But of course, that's, subject to the whims of the executive branch. So Taiwan cannot come out, at least if they play by the rules, which they shouldn't, and just say publicly or directly to the State Department and the Pentagon, hey, I want, 200 Harpoon missiles, or I want 50,000 rounds or 500,000 rounds, better yet, of 20 millimeter ammunition. They have to go to AIT, which is in Roslyn. It's across the river. It's not even at the State Department, and start the conversation there and say, pretty please, can we actually put in a request? And a lot of times the State Department and AIT say, well, no, we don't want to receive that request right now. It's not a good time. We're in the middle of negotiations with China. We're about to have a breakthrough on climate change and other nonsense like that. So I think Taiwan should break that. I think they should be much more loud, public, and direct in Washington, go to the Hill, say what they need. But there's this problem with AIT. It's just a disastrous organization.
Ray Burkhart was there for years, and Ray was like the symbol to me of he was the wizard at the top that kept the whole crazy kingdom in line. You know what I'm saying? Because, Ray could give you an honest answer, and they've lost Ray, and they don't have that anymore. Now it's a series of bureaucratic positions that people are moving through, and the whole goal there is not to do anything wrong that upsets the higher powers in China. The China team, to upset those people and then move on. The oddity is, I think this administration, just like the Trump administration, has more appetite for doing things in terms of selling weapons than the actual bureaucracy. In other words, I think we're in one of those yes minister situations here. You know what I'm saying? And they just don't do it. Now, we'll have to see. The other thing, by the way, on the elections that's going to be interesting out here is the reaction in Southeast Asia, and what's happening there in terms of what we're looking for. I think the Filipinos. I think Marcos personally is instinctively anti-Chinese. That's just his father's take. His mother is an open racist. She was always been bad. I don't even know if she calls him. There's some Filipino insult that I've heard that she calls him, and the person who hears it, I 100% believe. So the Chinese are very unpopular in the Philippines right now for just a variety of reasons. You know what I'm saying? From running gambling halls to the border things and all that stuff. So the Filipinos are someone that we need to really start looking at getting some weapons to. And the other thing too is, look, as we're retiring some of these things, somebody sent me something the other day. They were thinking about sending some ex-Navy ships to Latin America. Why? It's a waste of time. Send them out to Taiwan, send them out to the Philippines, send them to the Indonesians, and that's it. I happen to think, I'll get back to the first point I started. I think Xi Jinping broke too early. I think the world is basically, okay, this is what you're going to do. But I believe him. I believe him when he says he's going to do stuff. That's the problem that they had in Hong Kong. All these young kids and all these young people, in fairness to my boss, Jimmy, to Cardinal Zinn, they knew what they were going to do. Even the old dogs in the Democratic Party, Martin and some of these guys, God love them, but I don't think they really fully got what communists would do. And I think the reason why is they've never been bosses. It's one of those things, in other words, once you give say something, you got to do it, you do it. An old management trick I had was taught is if you really need to do something, just announce you're going to do it. You may not know how you're going to do it, but you do it. It's like when Zuckerberg comes out and says we're cutting 10% of the company. Once he says it, or Musk is cutting 50%, I guarantee you they had no idea how they were going to do it. But once you say it, the team will come together and do it. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we have to do with foreign policy. And they say, we're selling you these things, take the grief, but deliver the damn weapons. And that's one of the problems with Ukraine. They're sucking everything up.
Yes.
But the Taiwanese bear a lot of the Taiwanese need to make themselves up. They want to be the porcupine. And I'm so tired. Oh, they're the porcupine. They're not the porcupine. They got right. They got no pines. They're basically right now the beaver. They need to grow the spines. It's the beaver. They're sitting in their mud hut waiting for someone to come along and, wipe it down. Maybe they're the three little pigs, someone come along and blow their huff and puff and blow it down. Well, Xi Jinping, he's telling you he's coming by to eat you. He's going to do it. That's what wolves do, So
Sorry. One last question while we're still in Southeast Asia is that the leader of Vietnam recently paid, I don't know if it's a formal state visit, but there's a lot of pomp and circumstance and communist embrace. He visited Xi Jinping in Beijing. This is a big deal because Xi hasn't received a whole lot of leaders because he is crazy paranoid about the Wu flu that originated from China. Is this just standard sort of keeping up appearances and gardening from one communist official to another, or is there a change in the relationship between Beijing and Hanoi?
They hate him still.
Yeah.
They hate each other. I still remember when I went to Vietnam a while back. In fact, I went with, it's in the news. So I went with Jack Keane and Wolfowitz. We went down there as part of this tour thing. They hate them. I mean, anybody who walked out of there, because you have the Chinese Communist Party and the Vietnamese Communist Party. And they have these echelons. And we meet with you. I remember we met with a couple of guys from the Ministry of Defense who spoke fluent English. And we're going well, it looks like you guys are having talks with them all the time. It's the political guys. They got to do that bullshit. They got nothing else to do. I mean, literally, that was the answer. I think I'm literally quoting the guy verbatim. He literally said, he goes, "Oh, they do that crap." And this guy had studied at the National Singaporean University, NSU, or whatever it was. He's a very nice guy. Actually, I liked him a lot. It's one of those things. You can tell his father fought like the Americans 5 or 6 times, and he told me the story. He said his dad always wanted to go to the U.S. and he applied for a visa and he couldn't do it because his father was fairly educated. And he went over, and when he went over, he basically he wanted some Vietnamese food, so he went into a Vietnamese place in L.A. and he was having lunch, and somebody recognized him as the former colonel, and they were fine. Everybody got along and stuff like that. And he said, my dad then went and met with some of the American VFW halls or something like that. Somebody asked him to just have an informal lunch, nothing formal. And he said they bonded over their hate of China. Which, by the way, I think that's working out in the California 45 right now. I think she's going to win. The Korean woman's going to win, right?
Okay. Yes, I think that's right. This is what the former Ed Royce district that kind of straddles part of LA and part of Orange County.
That's a subject down the road there. But no, I don't know. I mean, the other thing too is about Southeast Asia is that, if we think the Chinese are messing around in our political systems, other than Singapore, where the Singaporeans basically will throw their ass right out if they catch them. They really, and they do all the time. We just don't read about it. Other than that, I tend to have a strong belief that they are messing around so bad in so many of the systems. You know what I'm saying? Marcos won so convincingly, you can't really complain about it. But if it would have been, but they were in there, they were mucking around there. There's no doubt about that.
Huh. Well, one last anecdote on Vietnam. I've been to Hanoi and Saigon, and I like Hanoi a lot better. In Saigon, you go to a museum, they're awfully hard on us, the Americans. But if you go to Hanoi, they're really hard on the French. And it's a nice town, It didn't really get bombed. It's a lot of colonial architecture.
I was sitting around one time, and I was having a cigar in Hanoi about 10 years ago. I was there. I was actually there by myself with nobody else, 2 nights, looking at something for an old boss, looking at a potential deal for him. And I was just sitting out there having a cigar, enjoying myself. And I know this will sound odd, and I'm sure I don't know all the backwards things, but I had gone to mass that evening at the Catholic Church. Okay. Now it was in Vietnamese. So I basically stayed 20 minutes and said, "Is that enough, Jesus?" and left and had a cigar and a drink. But I'm sitting there, and I'm sitting in this really nice little cafe smoking a cigar. And it was just a very normal place. You know, if it could have been any other place in Southeast Asia. It didn't have the air of oppression. And I'm sure they do. In other words, we don't see it. But here's the thing. I had a conversation. Other guys were smoking cigars there. China came up. They don't like China. It's a bully. China bullies them. They cause them problems. But as a guy said to us one time when we were there with that group, there's 120 million of us and 1.3 billion of them. Get the math? And Taiwan has to understand that math too. And I think the U.S. has to understand that math. We have to make Taiwan basically a cost too high for them.
Yeah.
But we're never going to win. In other words, if they really want it, they're going to take it. But you have to make the cost so high. You know, that's it. And next time we talk, we can talk about how we do that, because I think one of the ways we do it is through currency denial, like we do to the Russians. I'm working that out in my mind right now.
Great, yes. Well, might as well use the full spectrum of national power that we have.
Yeah.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for this episode of Simon White. We'll be back again soon with another episode. Thank you, Mark Simon from Taipei, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.